Hey, what is going on, Twintendo Nation? Hope you're having an awesome day. Throughout Pokemon's long history, there have been many secrets hidden in the game and in its data, so I decided to choose some of my favourite secrets from the Pokemon franchise. Now there are so many Pokemon secrets out there, so obviously I couldn't include them all, but if you do enjoy this video and you'd like to see another one like this, let me know in the comments below. Also, before we start the video, I just want to quickly mention that I've started up a brand new Pokemon Go podcast with the likes of Trainer Tips and Reversal. Whether you're into Pokemon Go or not anymore, I'd really appreciate it if you guys could check this out. The first episode is on Trainer Tips channel, and later episodes will be coming out on my channel and Reversal channel. But anyway guys, with that out the way, let's start the video. In the Pokemon game's 20-year-long history, we've seen the amount of types grow from 15 in Red and Blue to 17 in Gold and Silver, and with the introduction of the Fairy type in 2013, we currently have 18 types. However, there is one type that was found all the way back in Red and Blue that has still been left unused. This is the weirdly named Bird type, which can be found all the way up to Pokemon Crystal. This bird typing is not to be confused with the Flying type, as it has different properties about it, although it is likely that this type was scrapped in favour of an all-round Flying type. Interestingly, the Bird type has no types that are super effective or not very effective against it, and vice versa. Since the Bird type can only do standard damage and only take standard damage, it's highly likely that this typing was abandoned at an early stage. Although officially there are no Bird type moves in the history of Pokemon, if it had any moves they would all be physical. This is because there are two Bird type Pokemon. Well, Pokemon might not be the right word to use, but the infamous Missing No and its sibling M are both dual Bird normal type. So in the end, we'll never know whether the Bird type was a new exclusive typing or an early prototype for the Flying type. Whatever it was, it's certainly a Pokemon secret Game Freak didn't want us to know about. Sticking around in the same generation, Gen 1 is a very special and memorable era of Pokemon for millions. The majority of people's favourite Pokemon come from this generation, and many have become very iconic in the Pokemon world, like Pikachu, Eevee and Mewtwo. But what if I told you that these Pokemon had entirely different names just before the games were released in the West? Well, surprisingly, this is true, and some of these names are beyond terrible. Here we can see a pre-release poster for Pokemon Red and Blue, and as you can see, some of the Pokemon's names are dramatically different. Now I'm sure there are some people watching this thinking, how do you know this isn't fan-made? Well, a lot of the pre-release promo used these Pokemon names instead of what they currently have. Also, the Pokemon Training Survival Guidebook, which was one of the earliest guides for Pokemon Red and Blue, erroneously calls Haunter Spectre, which is its pre-release name. Now I'm not going to go through all the names, but I'll pick out some of the more interesting ones. So there's Jigglypuff and Wigglytuff, which were named Pudding and Custard. Machop, Machoke and Machamp being known as Karate, Kung Fu and Judo, which to be honest isn't that bad. Cubone was called Orphan, which is seriously dark. Lapras was known as Ness, Eevee was Eon, which explains why all Eevee evolutions end in Eon. And finally, Kakuna was called Metapod, which doesn't sound right at all. So very interesting stuff. And if you want to check out the full list, I'll leave a link to the poster in the description. In 2005, Pokemon released a brand new Pokemon franchise that still has a very loyal following to this day. This is of course Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Blue and Red Rescue Team. Now it wouldn't be a Twintendo video if I didn't include Mystery Dungeon, but there is a really interesting secret in the first game that people still don't know how to activate or what the odds are of it happening. Blue and Red Rescue Team was one of the last Generation 3 games and had a few hints of what was to come by showing Generation 4 Pokemon such as Lucario, Weavile, Mime Jr and Bonsly in the forms of statues. However, once you beat the game there is a random chance of another Generation 4 Pokemon appearing. If you head to Pokemon Square there is a chance you may encounter a Munchlax, who at the time was unavailable in any of the main Pokemon games, and had only been shown in the anime. Unlike the other previewed Generation 4 Pokemon, Munchlax can move around and talk to the player, but unfortunately they aren't recruitable until Explorers of Time and Darkness. The reason I find this secret so interesting is that it is a decade on and we still don't know what causes Munchlax to appear in the game. Now there have been many mysterious items over the years in the main Pokemon games, and some of these items cannot be obtained by the player, but you can actually hack these items in even up to Generation 7. There are unobtainable items in every Pokemon game, with some that are related to the story, such as the Red Chain and Magma Stone from Pokemon Diamond, Pearl and Platinum. Items like these might have been available to the player originally, but Game Freak most likely decided they should be story-only items used by NPCs instead. Now, like the different Pokemon names I mentioned earlier, there are so many obtainable items, so I'll only go over the most interesting ones. There are obvious scrapped items like the Loot Sack, which would have been used to store items from the Underground in Generation 4, and interestingly its description changes from Generation 5 to Generation 6, which is strange because if the player shouldn't be able to obtain it, why change the description? The Magma Stone makes its first appearance in Diamond and Pearl and can be obtained through hacking. However, 6 years later, this item becomes available in Black and White too. These are the only games it is available in, and it's strange how it was sitting in the Pokemon game's data for 6 years before being used by the player. The final items we'll be looking at are ones that we don't know the purpose of. Firstly, there is the God Stone, which was first discovered in Black and White 2's data, and the Common Stone, which appears in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. The description doesn't give us much to go off, and unfortunately, most likely, we'll never know what their purpose was either. It's rare to see what work goes into Pokemon games, but one of the rare exceptions was Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. After its release in 2002, some prototype images were leaked which showed 5 different pieces of concept art. 2 of these were in early design of Torchic, and originally Torchic was going to have these big floppy ears, but apart from that, it looked fairly similar to its final design. Interestingly, there's a date on one of these concept arts which shows this design was finished on the 29th of March 2002, which was just under 8 months before the game was released in Japan. There's also concept art for an unused Pokemon that looks like a fusion of Blaziken and Latios, which we'll name Latican for now. On top of Latican is an unused trainer type who makes an appearance in some official artwork of Latios and Latias. Maybe she was supposed to be a dragon type trainer? There's also some concept art of Trico, and as we can see from the drawings, Trico went through quite a few changes before reaching its final form. The last piece of concept art was of Groudon, who for the most part looks unchanged. It's a shame we haven't seen more prototype Pokemon, but unfortunately the majority of them have been kept secret. But who knows, maybe the Pokemon Company will one day release an art book full of concept art that they have kept from us. In the first generation of Pokemon, we were introduced to legendary Pokemon in the form of the legendary birds. In future games we've seen other legendary trios, but these birds were the trendsetters. However, originally Game Freak had planned to have another Pokemon take one of the legendaries' place, or so the rumour goes anyway. The Pokemon that was eventually scrapped as a legendary Pokemon was none other than Arcanine, who was perfectly named a legendary Pokemon in its Pokédex entry. The idea is that Arcanine was designed before Moltres was, and was the fire type for the legendary trio in Generation 1, and supposedly ruled over the other 2 legendaries. There is even more proof of this in the Pokemon anime. As we can see in the second episode, on the wall of the Pokemon Center is a painting of the legendary bird trio, and what a surprise, Arcanine is there! This painting is also used in 2013's Pokemon Origins. It seems that Pokemon included a few callbacks to Arcanine's origin with its Pokédex listing as well as the painting in the anime. At the end of the day, we'll probably never know whether Arcanine was supposed to be a legendary or not, but with all the evidence, it certainly makes it one of the more interesting Pokemon secrets out there. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about Arcanine. Do you think it was supposed to be a legendary alongside Zapdos and Articuno? I mean, maybe that explains why they did legendary beasts in the second generation. Maybe they regretted not using Arcanine as a legendary at the time. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire are one of the most interesting games in terms of secrets, and in the data there is some interesting findings to suggest that we were originally supposed to go back to the Johto region. The previous games, Pokemon Gold and Silver, were some of the best and most popular games in the series, as you could visit 2 regions, and it seemed like Game Freak had the same idea in this game. In the internal data there is remastered Generation 2 music, which includes Route 38, Pewter City, Suicune's battle music, Nation radio tower occupied. It does make you wonder whether Game Freak originally wanted to take the player back to Johto, but unfortunately couldn't due to the GBA's limitation. Now it is possible that Game Freak were just testing out the Game Boy Advance's sound capabilities by remastering Generation 2 music, but most likely it'll remain a secret what their purpose really was. Back before Pokemon Sun and Moon launched, Pokemon Go was all the rage, and at the time I hypothesized that it would be possible to trade Pokemon from Pokemon Go to Pokemon Sun and Moon, similarly to how you can trade from Red, Blue and Yellow on the Virtual Console to Sun and Moon. Even though it was hinted at by Junichi Masuda, there was no way to connect Sun and Moon to Pokemon Go. However, data in Pokemon Sun and Moon suggests that this was actually the case at one point. There is text for an unannounced Pokemon Go mystery gift, which reads, "Thank you for playing Pokemon Go, please pick up your gift from the delivery man in any Pokemon Center." There is also a second version which says, "Thank you for playing Pokemon Go, you have already picked up your gift from the delivery man." Pokemon Go is also listed in the location table as both a special location and a gift location. Now it might be possible we get this mystery gift at a later date, but for now it looks like the Pokemon Company are hiding the fact that these two games have the potential to connect to each other. In 2010, Pokemon Black and White were released in Japan and it introduced lots of new Pokemon. One of these Pokemon was Munna, the Dream Eater Pokemon. Now what's interesting about Munna is that even though it was released back in 2010, there have been many references that are linked to it, stretching back even 14 years before its release. In Pokemon Red and Blue and Fire Red and Leaf Green, there is a picnicker in Route 10 who after getting beaten in battle says, "The Pokemon here are so chunky, there should be a pink one with a floral pattern." That description fits Munna perfectly. Now in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire there is a scientist at the Devon Corporation who says he wants to create a machine that can visually reproduce the dreams of Pokemon. Fast forward 2 generations and we have Munna who can produce an item called Dream Mist which allows people to see Pokemon's dreams. Now personally I do think that some of these are coincidences, especially the reference in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. However, I find it highly likely that Munna was originally a scrapped Pokemon from the first generation and then redesigned at a later date. As I've mentioned earlier in the video, it's very difficult to find old concept art, so most likely we'll never know the secret behind Munna's origin. And now for one of the most interesting secrets in the Pokemon franchise. This secret, like many on this list, appears in Generation 1. By performing certain glitches, it is possible to battle Professor Oak, which suggests he was supposed to be battleable at some stage in the game's development. To battle Professor Oak, either perform the Ditto glitch with a special stat of 226, or perform the Old Man glitch with the character MN in the 3rd, 5th or 7th slot of the player's name. It is possible to battle Professor Oak in every Generation 1 game, and his team will be different depending on what Pokemon you chose. His main team consists of a level 66 Tauros, level 67 Exeggutor, level 68 Arcanine, and a level 70 Gyarados. His starter Pokemon will be level 69 respectively. Now Professor Oak's team is on par with Blue's, who is the Pokemon League champion. Furthermore, 4 of Oak's Pokemon are the same as Blue's, which suggests Professor Oak might have been meant to be the champion at some point during development. Nevertheless, while mildly altering the game, you can battle this secret boss, whether you were meant to battle him or not. Well, those are some of the best secrets the Pokemon games have got to offer. Let me know whether you'd like to see a sequel to this video, because there are definitely a lot more secrets I could have included. And if you enjoyed the video, then hit that like button down below, really appreciate the support guys, and if you want to stay up to date with everything Pokemon, then hit the subscribe button down below. Anyway guys, that's it for this video, thank you very much for watching, hope you have an awesome day, and I will see you on the next video. Peace!